In the last session, we talked about how to build our very first biz job. And you'll notice that what we hard-coded pretty much everything in here. We hard-coded the path to our file names. We hard-coded the server name and username and password for our database and things like that. So all of these things are things that you typically don't want to hard code in a program. You want those to be soft variables or parameters that you can pass in. So what we're going to talk about in this session is parameters and how to use them in BlueSky Integration Studio. So really there's two levels of parameters in BlueSky Integration Studio. There's parameters at the job level. Okay, so if I double click anywhere in the white area of the designer, I'll get the properties specific to this job at the job level. Okay, and you'll notice one of those properties is job parameters. So if I create a parameter at the job level, what will happen here is it'll prompt me for the parameter value when I go to run the job. Okay, so let's go ahead and show how that works. So let's say, for instance, I want to take this path and I'm just going to replace it with a parameter called file name. Okay, and this is how you use a parameter. Okay, so whatever the parameter name is, you're going to wrap it in the CRP tags and the CRP closing tag. And that tells Biz that, hey, this is a parameter. You're going to go out and look for the parameter value for this, and it's stored separately from the program to run, and you're going to pass it in when the program starts. Okay, so to create that parameter, we used a parameter called file name. I'm going to go ahead and click anywhere in the white area of the job to get to the job level parameters, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to create a parameter called file name. Now here I don't use the CRP tags at the beginning and the end. I'm just giving it the parameter name. So in here you define the parameter name and the value, and I'll just paste in that initial CSV file for the initial value and say OK. But where you're actually going to use it, you use it in the with the CRP tags. Okay. Now, if I go ahead and I compile this job and save it. Okay, so I just made that change and I recompile. Now if I go and I rerun this load transactions job that we had played with before, it's going to pop up and ask me, well, what do you want that value to be when I go to run the job? So now I can change this to any value I want, as long as it's pointing to a valid CSV file. I can load that up, right? So I'll just use the default value and I'll go ahead and click OK, and that value is going to be now passed into the job, and the job's going to run. Okay. Now if I go look at the job log, the very first thing that happens when a job starts up is it goes out and it looks for those parameters. So you'll see here job parameters for this execution, and it found a parameter called file name, and the value is the path to our CSV file. Okay, so it recognized that we had a parameter, it passed it into the job, and it used that value to actually load that file name. Okay, so that's a job level parameter. Typically, you use job level parameters when you want to have a job that you want it to prompt you, for the value when you're in job control. If you want to have, the other way that you can have a parameter is through domain level parameters. Okay, so those are sort of global parameters within an application domain within Biz. Okay, and that's up here. That's called domain parameters. So this is kind of nice because you could set up the parameter once, and it basically becomes available to all ETL jobs within this application domain. And we'll talk about application domains later, but for this purpose, an application domain is nothing more than a specific area in which to store jobs, right? It's just a bucket to store jobs into. So, like in this scenario, maybe I want to create some parameters, and I want to call it database server. Okay, and I'll put username and my password in here as well. Now you'll notice that it recognized that this is a password. So the way that it does that is if it has the word password in it, then it's going to treat it like a password. If it has PWD in it, it's also going to treat it like a password. So you could basically name your parameters that way and automatically hide your passwords throughout the system so they're not blatantly visible. Now I can use these parameters because they're domain level parameters. I can use these anywhere in any ETL job across this whole biz domain, okay, including this job here that we created. So those parameters aren't connected in any way to this job. It's just they're sort of globally hanging out there in the system. But I can use them in this job. So instead of hard coding, these values, I can come in here and actually use those values now. So instead of hard coding the database name, I'll use the parameter value. And instead of hard coding the username, I'll use a parameter. And instead of hard coding the password, I'll use a parameter. Okay, and I can hide that too. And say OK. Now all these things here are completely parameterized so that if I go ahead and run the job, okay, if I go back to job control here and I run the job, it's still going to prompt me for my job level parameter, but it's only going to prompt me for the one parameter that's a job level parameter, and that happens to be the file name. All the other ones are up there in the domain level parameters. Okay, so it's going to go ahead and run the job. Okay, so now if I go and I look at the job log, okay, you'll notice here that it found job parameters for this execution, and it found my file name because that's a job level parameter. And then it says, okay, well, what are the system parameters, or the final parameters after synchronization with the application domain level parameters? So you really have two levels of parameters. You got domain level and you got job level. Okay. So now when you look at the list here, it says, oh, okay, well, here's the final list of the parameters that I'm going to use after synchronization between the two, between the domain and the job level. Here's my fully formed list of parameters. So here's my file name, my database server username, password, and this is what I'm going to use in the execution of this job. And we obviously did it correctly because the job finished and it loaded 16,000 records here. Okay. So it's kind of nice because I can build a generic job, to load X number of different files, as long as they're all the same format, and I can connect to my database, and I don't necessarily have to hard code the server name, username, password. And then say 6 months from now, the password changes for that database. I just come up here to the domain level parameters. I change the password here, and every job that uses these domain level parameters would automatically be affected the next time it runs. I don't have to recompile those jobs. I don't have to go touch them. I don't have to go find them. Every job that uses those domain level parameters will now be automatically changed. So that is how you use parameters in BlueSky Integration Studio.